Hey, what's up guys, it's BenBonk, and welcome back to the 54th Slimekeep Devlog. Now, this devlog is going to be a bit different from others, as I've really just locked in the past few months and haven't recorded much pure development content. Instead, I just want to take some time to showcase all the new stuff I've added into the game within the last few months. So firstly, let's talk about bugs and feedback. In my last video, which I'd highly recommend you go watch if you haven't already, I talked about the sheer number of bugs and feedback I had to work through in the game. Now, a lot of the stuff I've been working on recently has just been these small bug fixes and small tweaks here and there, but for this devlog, I want to focus in on new content, so just keep in mind that 90% of the stuff I've been working on has been quite minor, and there's just too much to show that I'll be leaving most of it out from this devlog. Still, we've got a ton to get through, so let's get started with some of these smaller, new additions, and work our way up to some bigger changes. First up, I got some feedback that after bosses died, things felt a little unimpactful, so I added in this boss defeated text that pops up after defeating a boss to make things feel a bit more satisfying. Next, I added in this option to remove the slime pet dialogue, as some of my playtesters said they didn't like it, and I didn't want to force my goofy pet dialogue on every player if they didn't want it. Then we had this ricochet gun to deal with. I realized that it was super buggy and hard to get the ricochet logic working well. So instead of spending a bunch of time trying to figure things out, I just scrapped the ricochet logic, renamed this weapon to the Tommy gun, and called it a day. Moving on, players didn't like how weapons and upgrades were just automatically picked up upon walking over them. So to make things feel better, I added in this info panel to every weapon and upgrade drop, which displays the name in the description. The player can then press the interact key to actually pick up the weapon. And staying on the topic of weapons, I decided to make the machine gun way more powerful and satisfying by greatly increasing its fire rate. And one thing you can do with this machine gun is shoot at these TNT crates, which I also made feel way more impactful with particle effects and a pulse animation. Next up, let's talk about the minimap. I added in this epic border to the minimap in the pause menu, as well as updated the boat room minimap art to look way better and not this massive block. I also got some feedback from playtesters that it was unclear when an upgrade dropped inside of a room, so I added in these question mark icons to the minimap whenever there's a weapon or upgrade on the ground. Now let's take a look at the pits in the game. It was just a bit boring how the player would shrink down with their default sprite when falling into one, so I added in this unique pitfall sprite. And speaking of falling into pits, enemies could now fall into pits if you shoot them into one, which I don't know why it took me so long to add this. And I don't know why it's taking you so long to wishlist Slimekeep. All you gotta do is click the link in the description and press the add to your wishlist button. It's super easy to do, and if I hit 20,000 wishlists before launch, I'll release the game with a 20% discount to everyone. So consider helping out and wishlisting the game. Moving on, let's take a look at some polish related changes. I added in a bit of screen shake to the dash and made it shorter but faster to make things feel a bit more impactful. I made the Slime King Crush cutscene feel a lot better with screen shake and sound effects. I added a satisfying pop-up animation when hovering over an upgrade in your inventory or in the slime book. I added satisfying pop-ups to all the programs in the computer. I gave slime balls a slight glow and made them vary in size a bit when being dropped from slimes. And finally, I made it so birds spawn more spread out and not on top of each other like before. Next, I worked on just a few more changes to improve clarity in the game. So for example, I added in a pop-up message when trying to pick up ammo with weapons that don't need ammo / are full. I added in a DPS meter when shooting the target in the player hub area, as quite a few playtesters wanted to compare weapons and their damage per second values. And finally, I made it so when releasing slimes from the pen, it'll cause them to be unlocked in the Slimepedia instead of them being unlocked when killing that slime, as that just didn't really make much sense. But what I think makes a whole lot of sense is the fact that I'm using Ryder from JetBrains as my IDE for developing Slimekeep, who happens to be the sponsor of this video. JetBrains Ryder is the ultimate IDE for game developers looking to improve their productivity and streamline their workflow, and is now free for non-commercial development. Ryder integrates perfectly into popular game engines like Unity and helps enable efficient script debugging, game profiling, asset refreshing, and so much more. I've personally been using Ryder for the past few years, and it's the IDE you've been seeing me use for all the programming clips in these Slimekeep devlogs. I really do love working with Ryder, and it's just a super powerful, fast, and cross-platform solution for all your development needs. I especially love its super easy to use navigation among all these scripts in your game. Also, from my experience, everything just feels super polished inside the IDE, from code completion to refactoring. Seriously, I often just forget how easy development has become since I first started using Ryder. Like, check out this super cool autocomplete feature. Ryder understands the context of your code and makes relevant coding suggestions as you type. It's just made my life so much easier when developing in Unity, but it also works great for other game engines such as Unreal or Godot. But game development isn't where Ryder ends. If you're a developer using the .NET framework, it's also a great fit. And if you're more of a JavaScript or TypeScript developer, you can also check out WebStorm, which is also now completely free for non-commercial use. So what are you waiting for? Just click the link in the description to try out Rider and WebStorm completely for free. Thanks to JetBrains for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's now move on to a bunch of changes that took me a bit longer to create and are a bit more important to the game overall. First up, it was kind of annoying to a lot of people that you could only play the game with one set crosshair size, so I added in an option to change the crosshair size to a bunch of different preset sizes. Speaking of new settings, I also added in this anti-aliasing checkbox if the player wants that. Then I worked on a few slimeball related additions. Notably, I made these small slime balls drop after killing a slime, so you can see exactly how many slime balls a slime drops. Then after clearing a room, I also changed how these slime balls move towards the player, as previously they would kind of be slower than the actual player and look really awkward. So I fixed this up and made them a lot faster overall. Then for these special slime balls, or these slime balls that you gain after beating the Slime King and can be used for purchasing hub cosmetics, I made it so that the player can now gain these special slime balls from just playing the game, and not forcing them to necessarily beat the Slime King over and over again. Moving on, I've got a few changes and additions relating to the pause menu. Firstly, on the inventory page, the player now has the choice to discard upgrades. I realize that the player may not necessarily like a certain upgrade, so if they don't want it after picking it up, well, they don't have to use it. Also, when previously opening the pause menu or Book of Slime, the music in the game would just stop, which felt kinda weird. So instead of just straight up stopping it, I made it so the music still plays while open, but with a low pass filter to not be too distracting. Okay, it's now time for some gameplay changes. Firstly, I added in this pop-up after clearing all enemy and boss rooms in a day. This just makes things a bit more clear and lets the player know that they don't have to necessarily keep exploring for slime balls. Then I changed how the overlay minimap works to follow the player around when opened, as it didn't do this previously. But don't worry, you can still move it around with the mouse if needed. Next, I added in this out of combat movement speed slider, so the player can choose to decrease their downtime between rooms if they'd like. I'm not sure if I actually want to keep this feature in the final game, so let me know what you guys think. But finally, I'd always gotten a ton of feedback from you guys that it's too hard to differentiate these slime pet and enemies, as you all have white outlines now. So I made the slime pet translucent when fighting in an enemy room to hopefully make him appear not as a threat. Then for the last few medium impact changes, I added in custom art for the puddle and boat room animations for each skin, changed the intro cutscene to only play once instead of every single time you open the game, and made it so that slimes in the slime pin can now actually grow when sleeping and give you more slime balls if you wait. Okay, now it's finally time for some of the bigger stuff. Thanks for sticking around. Firstly, let's talk about the UI in the game. Specifically all the buttons, text, and so on in all the menus. I wouldn't say they look terrible as of now, but I also couldn't say that they looked great. So I spent a ton of time doing a full UI rework in the game. Instead of having these blocky backgrounds for some elements, I made them goopy looking and added goopy borders to a bunch of UI panels. Instead of having the text just look boring and static, I gave every single piece of text in the game a slight drop shadow to give them depth. Instead of having blocky, unfinished buttons, drop downs, and sliders, I created custom pixel art sprites for each of these elements in the game. Instead of having super light text on a lot of the UI panels, I changed this text to be a dark blue color to provide higher contrast and improved readability. And finally, instead of having these kind of slow, unsatisfying UI pop-up animations, I made every UI panel pop up quickly with a slight bounce to make them feel snappier and so much more satisfying to interact with. Overall, all these changes just made the game feel so much more professional and polished, so I'm really happy I got this done. But next up, let's talk about some pretty huge additions to the slime pet and capturing system. Firstly, I made a new reward screen in the Slimeinator that shows up after synthesizing slimes into the Slimeinator. This screen simply shows all the slimes that were in your pen and what currency they give to provide a bit more clarity to the player. And now for the real big stuff, I removed the capturing inventory limitation for good, as well as the move speed subtraction debuff from holding too many slimes in your inventory. And because this inventory bar under the player's health was no longer being used, I had an idea. Basically now, whenever the player captures a slime, instead of their inventory filling up, their rush mode meter will fill up. Now, what is rush mode, you may ask? Well, basically it's a special mode that the player can activate at any time once their rush mode meter is full. That lasts around 20 seconds. See, if I press Control on my keyboard with my rush mode meter full, you can see it tick down. But what does rush mode actually do? Well, basically it's up to you. See, I can now head over to the Slimeinator, click this next button, and view a whole new panel of upgrades. These upgrades offer an alternative to upgrading your slime pet and contain some pretty sick buffs to the player. For example, I can do double damage while active or gain more movement speed. I can also purchase upgrades that make bullets spew out in all directions while active, or increase the duration of this buff. Overall, I think this new system is super cool and fun to play around with. And if you're wondering why I created it in the first place, well, basically, I wanted to incentivize capturing slimes a bit more, as previously this system felt a little underbaked with just the slime pet. So yeah, let me know what you think. But moving along, I basically did a slight rework for every boss in the game. I got a lot of feedback that the bosses as of now just felt super sluggish, so I wanted to fix this. Now, to cram a few weeks worth of work into just a few sentences, I basically just went through every single boss in the game, made their attacks feel snappier and faster, as well as adding a few new attacks. So take for example the mech boss. I added in a new ground pound slam attack, another phase 2 attack with this homing blade, and a new phase 2 death animation. Then taking a look at the chopper boss, he has this new airstrike attack, which is pretty cool also. So yeah, basically all the bosses just feel way better than before. Next up, we had some weapon changes. Mainly, I made it so that every weapon now has the same move speed. Previously, if the player was holding a heavy weapon such as the Gatling bolt, they would move considerably slower compared to if they were just holding their pistol. But a lot of people didn't seem to like this system, which is fair, so I just removed the variability. I also implemented a slight damage rework for every weapon in the game, so these weapons could now do decimal damage. Previously, all weapons could only attack with whole numbers, which made some upgrades like the triple shot super overpowered because of how I had things set up. This doesn't really change much in the game on the surface, but it does make many of the damage increasing/decreasing upgrades way more balanced. And I also did tweak a few of the weapons, such as the fish and the machine gun, to do decimal damage up front. Next up, we had something small but pretty impactful, which is the fact that the player can now walk behind pretty much every building in the game. Now, this was a ton of work reconfiguring all these colliders, but I think it was totally worth it as things feel so much more natural now, and it just felt super weird perspective-wise to not be able to walk behind buildings. Moving on, one of the big critiques I've gotten in the game over the past few months has been regarding the tutorial, which was totally fair. The tutorial really just isn't that great, so I wanted to make things feel a lot more natural instead of just placing down a bunch of text and hoping the player remembers it in game. So I decided to make a more interactive tutorial in the game that will trigger the first time you open it up and start a run. Basically, this little guide will walk you through how capturing the game works, how your slime pin works, and just a few other small things. I think this is an improvement overall, however, I have received some mixed feedback from my playtesters, so I'll just have to see about this system. Okay, now for the final big set of changes, we had some changes to some of the NPCs in the game. Basically, I wanted to make these guys feel more alive and connected to the world. So I made a few of them, like the boat room guy, shooting range guy, and weapon crate guy, speak dialogue for the first time you talk to them, and after beating the Slime King. I think this was just a nice touch, but staying on the topic of NPCs, I also made two new ones. We've got this adventurer and statue guy, who you can talk to if you find them randomly in a room. I spent quite a while on each of them, and they have their own kind of unique quest stuff that I really don't want to spoil here, so you'll just have to buy the game when it comes out to see what they do. But that's all I have for this devlog. Hopefully it wasn't too linear and boring, but thanks for sticking around. Also, don't forget to wishlist Slimekeep on Steam and check out JetBrains to upgrade your development experience. Anyways, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.